Welcome to Conversations with Zi and Vindesh, a weekly discussion that explores common life challenges and offers practical solutions. Learn more at dharmamedia.com. That's DHARMA media.com.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to this week's edition of Conversations. Master Zi, always good to see you. And today we're talking about individualism. So last time we talked about propaganda and how if you're not careful, the media wants to program you so they can control you. So they use these words and these phrases and create these stories to give you a certain picture of the world so that you're programmed to behave in a certain way. Now, we don't want to do that. We want to step away from the propaganda. We want to be more individualistic. We want to own our own narratives, our own ideas, but we also need strategies for how to interact with other people because we don't want to isolate ourselves. So that's the danger, Z. On the one hand, we want to think for ourselves. We don't want to be part of the herd. But on the other hand, we don't want to go so far that we get to an extreme and we just exist in an echo chamber and we don't hear any other ideas. I was thinking about this week because last week we had this whole interview between Vladimir Putin and Tucker Carlson. So this to me is incredible because we've had this war going on for 2 years. So 2 years we've had this war in Russia. And if you think about a fight, like if your kids are in a fight, teacher calls you up, Z, and says, your son was beating up some other kid, what's the first question you're going to ask?
Who won?
Yeah. So you might ask who won. You might be like, who beat down the other kid? If I looked at that situation, I'd probably ask, what happened? Tell me what happened. Who started this? What was the context? Why were they in this fight to begin with? It's very different if one kid just goes and starts pounding some other kid for no reason versus there was some argument and there was some escalation. So there are always two sides to a story. But for 2 years, we've never gotten the other side of the story. It's always been how Putin is horrible, he's evil, he's terrible, he's a monster. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I don't know the dude, but we've never gotten his side of the story, which to me is important. So we get Tucker Carlson, and he goes to Russia, and he does this 2-hour interview. I watched the entire interview, thought it was very interesting just to hear this man's perspective. To me, he came off as very rational. I mean, he's painted as just this complete madman, but his discussion was very thoughtful, very reasoned. And it was the first time we were getting the other side. Now, you might agree with what he says, you might disagree, but wouldn't it be important to have that information if you're going to make a decision as an individual about how you should think about this conflict? Or if we're going to make a decision as a nation in terms of who do we want to support? How do we want to approach this entire situation? Do we want to get entangled? Do we want to support one side? Do we not want to support that side? What's our level of commitment? What's the actual danger that we're facing? So all of these questions to me are very important, and we need that perspective. We don't want to isolate ourselves. We do want to be individuals. We don't want to buy into the propaganda on one side or the other, but we also want to balance that with a well-reasoned perspective. And what I thought was fascinating, there was so much pushback from this Tucker Carlson interview. So people basically lashed out at Tucker Carlson just for doing the interview. How dare you talk to Putin? How dare you give him a forum? Hillary Clinton called him a useful idiot. Now, maybe Tucker Carlson is an idiot. In this context, though, I understand why he was doing the interview. I think it was important that that other perspective is heard. People start asking, why are you supporting Russia? Why are you glorifying Russia? Why are you glorifying Putin? And it's kind of like, we're just listening to what the man has to say. You don't have to accept what he's saying, but why not have that perspective? So that's what we're talking about today. How do we navigate this world where we don't want to be indoctrinated with propaganda, but we also don't want to fall into these echo chambers and do the opposite and be so isolated that we're not getting the full picture and we can't make well-reasoned decisions. Z, give me your take. We talked a little bit about this Putin interview offline. What do you think about the whole discussion and some of the reaction we got to Tucker Carlson?
Look, Radheya, I look at it not just in that. What they were saying in the interview with each other to me wasn't as important to me as the reaction people had to them simply having a forum. That was the most interesting thing, is the overreaction. Example, whoever Hillary Clinton said, okay, he's a useful idiot. Why? is he a useful? What makes him a useful idiot is because he is offering the other side of a story. So that says more about where we're at socially than whatever else is going on within the context of that story. And it doesn't just apply to them in terms of that being a national or international story. It's really our universal society, to the point where we are polarized, to the point where one side of a story, half of a wheel, is now a whole wheel. A half of a wheel is not a wheel, right? It's an artist chakra. It's half of a circle, which isn't a complete circle. So don't you want the complete circle? I want the complete understanding. And then from there, I can make decisions. I may even be a biased juror. I may not be qualified to be on an impartial jury, but at least for the sake of integrity of the consciousness, I have the whole story. I try to warn people as a mental exercise to always look at the rest of the story, or the other parts of a story. And you may have your mindset, and it's very important for you to know, go in with your eyes wide open, knowing I already have an opinion, yet I would like to witness myself better. I'd like to be a better self-witness to understand why I have these biases, these beliefs, and where they came from. And in that query, you will start to unravel a lot of who you are, which goes a long way to preserve your own mental health, your own general well-being, and give you more insight into the world we live in. Here's this story has been told over and over. They're telling the story, you're at war with Russia, you're at war with Putin, and then you hear casually said on the news, well, you know how they are. You know how he is. Well, that's a real dictator right there. Well, he killed, what's his name? Navalny.
Yeah, Navalny.
Whatever. Yeah. So
Navalny.
Yeah, so he kills Navalny, and should we go to war? That's somebody was saying we should go to war now. So that one man that was allegedly killed by the Russians in prison is worth the whole nation going to war with Russia. Is nobody asking why would you go to war for that reason? How many people in a day in the U.S. prisons are killed under questionable circumstances with no resolution to their case? Didn't they just dig up a bunch of people buried at a prison in unmarked graves with no records of their death or even their incarceration? Yet no one's calling for war against the Alabama or Louisiana Correctional institution or the state itself. So when we do ourselves a big favor by having our intellectual part of us guarded in that individual kind of cast, so that we can keep our mind right, we can keep our collective consciousness on tune, right? We have to really, really be careful as to not be in a position where we lose our mind, where we actually are losing touch with reality, whatever that is. So when we talk about dementia, that means being out of dimension, out of sorts, out of phase with what's really going on in the world around us. This is part of it. And so the direction that we're being collectively encouraged to go in, or we're being herded into, is a place of dementia. If you sit back and think about people getting upset because Tucker Carlson talked to the Russian president, why did you get upset? I don't personally like Tucker Carlson. I don't like some of the things that he's done under his brand, but there's a lot of people. But one of the things that didn't bother me as he talks to another leader of a superpower. If nothing else, wouldn't you be interested? You've heard from one side what they're like. How about you go? Just like they were giving up warnings to all U.S. citizens traveling to different countries. And I heard people say, oh, it's better to stay at home. It's really dangerous in whatever, Guadalajara, wherever they were saying you shouldn't go. And then someone asked the question, what's the stats? What are the actual known stats on the dangers of these places. I think we talked about that. And they found out that the most dangerous place on earth is where? Was it Hungary? Was it Rwanda? Was it Eritrea? Was it Palestine? Where's the most dangerous place to be on average in a year? Well, it was the United States. It was the United States. So
say a little more about that, because you look at murder statistics, you got a lot more murderers in other countries. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, you look at statistics and you talk about per capita, population densities, and so forth, and your general expectations of safety. If I go to the Gaza Strip right now, I would have a pretty good expectation of me getting bombed, right? Because that's what they're doing there. If I happen to go to San Francisco to see the Golden Gate Bridge and ride the trolley, there's a good chance I'll be robbed and murdered, even more, just if not more than being bombed in Gaza. So when we put out warnings about places, that in itself is creating a kind of a insanity in our head. So I should be worried about something going on halfway around the world, maybe taking vacation there. And there's this unknown. There are risks associated with travel and so forth, which I know. But you're telling me I should fear that more than an actual known threat. They're actually making songs now about what they call blipping in Oakland, which is breaking into your car, robbing, carjacking, whatever. It is an unlivable place where they have PSAs out, public service announcements about when to get gas, where to go to get gas. These towns have fell apart for all practical purposes right here in America. So why aren't there travel warnings of of an ominous nature about America? Well, again, it goes back to what we talked about, our propaganda. But beyond the propaganda, it is co-opting our ability to think for ourselves. Yeah. So anyway, I think what happens in our minds is as we get so thoroughly indoctrinated that it does damage your brain. People who have been held incognito, held in prisons, tortured, isolated, they have mental deficits. They have identity issues. They have numerous psychosis acquired from being in some outer dimensional experience, extreme isolation, sleep deprivation, hearing information, being told that a lie is the truth, and so on and so forth, and being forced through different types of stresses to accept it or not reject these notions. So that's happening to a lot of us. I would say explore the world a little bit. China is not your enemy. We talked about that before. I would want to really know, what is the benefit of villainizing people? Immigrants aren't your enemy. What is the benefit of villainizing these people? And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some people, make sense to have your different border protocols. That makes sense. Nobody's arguing that. But the villainization of people outside of the math, the villainizations of countries and cultures outside of the actual math of what's going on. So when we look at these things, they're warning people about where not to take vacations. I would say a better thing to tell people is to be aware of your surroundings wherever you go. Behave in such a manner that you have a certain level of situational awareness that makes you a less likely target to predators. There's a big case on one of the islands where they want all this sympathy, and there's these mother and a daughter go somewhere and they get drinks from strange men, and they wake up unconscious in a hotel room, sexually assaulted and robbed or something. So I would ask you, if I go to a strange place, will I ask for a stranger?
Yeah, it's not just the women. I mean, there was this whole thing that you had these guys who were going to Colombia.
I mean, what do you think would happen? Let's say you didn't go to Colombia. This is just a mind-clearing exercise. Let's say you get on a random dating app and somebody tells you, meet me at Motel 6 at the outskirts of town. Let's have our first date there. It's going to be hot and heavy. Come on over with a pocket full of money. We can get high. It probably won't turn out for you there. I think, didn't Cardi B or one of those talk about how they used to rob guys, drug them and rob them at strip clubs? I think she used to talk about that, right? That was right here in the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, that's
I mean, that
right
stuff
here.
Still goes on. It goes on in some of the gay clubs.
The only difference is it's not highlighted in the news, and you can't really demonize foreigners in your own country. Like most of the murders, most of the mayhem going on is done by good old citizens, wherever you go. So,
right. It becomes harder to blame someone else. Now it's a little bit easier because you got all these immigrants coming over the border, setting up shop in different areas.
Yeah,
so you can always
and you
blame
never
that.
have to look at
That's
what brought them here. You never have to look at that. So what I say is, staying on track, our mental health isn't just something that we sit with, we meditate on, or we try to manage. Your mental health is something you have to guard. It's like you own you own a castle, or you have a fenced-in area that's your property. That's your mind. Positively protect your mind. You can't let anything into your property of your mind. And so a lot of this stuff we're being fed day in, day out. Ask yourself, how much of this stuff have I allowed in? Do you look at something and say, oh, it's Chinese, it's bad, or it's Russian, it's bad, or it's whoever the enemy of the day is, and ask, how is it affecting me every day? How does what's going on affect me every day? Our collective humanity is connected, but you want to really ask yourself, to what degree of connection? So if I think about, for example, keeping your mind healthy and keeping that integrity, I think about the stuff that goes on in the Middle East, and it's horrible. It's horrible to see the genocide. It's horrible to see the way people react to it. It's horrible to know that you have people that, because of their chosen, preferred, or imposed upon religious view, refuse to see horrible things going on or support it. And that's troubling, but I have to manage that and say, I get where they're coming from, right? I know that we talked about it a little bit. I don't like to get into it, but anti-Blackness pervades every area of society. Black people are some of the most hateful people towards other Black people because they want to be a white adjacent. I get it. A lot of ethnic groups that owe their very lifestyle and ability to become abundant owe the Black people that suffered a lot for it, but would never acknowledge that. I get it, because they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be in that situation. I'm not saying I condone that type of behavior, but that it's not for me to condone or not condone it. I have a certain view of integrity, a certain view of reverence. So I'm made that way, but I'm in the wrong position to talk about that, because I'm at that place on the social pecking order that my words don't really count that much anyway. But I can share the view to those people who value me in any way. And so we've all drank the Kool-Aid in a sense, but the Kool-Aid has made us drunk. It's made us less intelligent. It's made us less likely to prosper in life and do well. It's made us less safe, because we have enough of us who are mentally ill, who are borderline insane, who fell into the realm of sociopathy and psychopathy, that it's harder and harder for the individual, the ones of us, to just get by in society. Where do you trust your children? Where do you trust your assets, your resources? Where do you trust your health? And because it is so pervasive, and I'm saying for those of us who have opted out and we want to work on that, we can ask ourselves little questions to create a reference, a kind of a waypoint of our own mental clarity and mental health. Are you walking around talking about how bad Putin is, and Putin has nothing to do with your life. And you may have never heard anything he said. If you listen to the guy, whether you like him or not, for whatever reasons you don't like him or not, seeing that he's not in your life, he makes more sense than most American politicians. Sad to say. When you listen,
Yeah, that's 100% true. Well,
Right.
the American politicians, they can't even get coherent thoughts out. We're hearing debates and people are mixing up names, they're mixing up dates, they're stumbling on their words. It's a pretty appalling situation. So you're right. Number one, the bar isn't even that high. You put together some coherent thoughts, great. You're already a step ahead. And then just the logic, a lot of the logic behind what he was saying. And I don't want to come out and tell people that they should agree with him or they shouldn't agree. I just want to focus on the words that he was saying and the thought process around it. He was asked questions such as, are you going to attack Europe? Are you going to attack Poland? His perspective was, why the hell would I do that? Why would I do that? That's going to lead to a world war. That's going to threaten humanity. I have no interest in doing that. I have an interest in moving forward, in building alliances. It almost created the sense that if you look at U.S. foreign policy, we're stuck in the wrong era. We're fighting a war in a set of conditions that ended 30 or 40 years ago. But maybe now you have people who have nothing else to do. So if the Cold War ended 30 years ago and you have entire departments that are dedicated to neutralizing a Russia threat, if they want to survive, if they want to keep their jobs, they've got to keep on talking about that threat. They have to come up with plans to contain that threat. They have to keep it alive. Otherwise, what do they do? How do they survive? So we have to recognize that as well. And you've made this point on the last podcast that we had. We need to know what people are selling us. What are their motivations? What are their incentives? What are they trying to get us to do? Because if we understand that, then we can adjust and we can filter out some of that information and say, you know what, some of it might be correct, but some of it comes from a place of personal incentives that may benefit the individual. It doesn't necessarily benefit me. It's not necessarily pushing us in the direction of the greater good. And we can start making these adjustments in our mind and get to a more sensible point.
You're so right. As I was talking to you, a lot of things came up. I started thinking about what can we do to keep ourselves in order as individuals. I started by asking those questions when you find yourself parroting these lines that you've been fed, no different than if you went to a nightclub and somebody slipped some sort of drug in your drink. The media, as it stands, has slipped the drug in your drink. And the drug has been delivered to you in a medium that looks like reasoned intellect. But it's not. There's a reason that we propagandize populations. We kind of brainwash people. We collect order, because the more that you give away personal agency, the more an agency will take care of you. So they will control your behavior, your consumer products. I just saw where one of the countries was sending a stockpile of weapons to Ukraine. And because I'm a military buff, I tend to pay attention to all things military. I looked at why they would do that. Why would this country, it might have been Sweden or somewhere, says we're going to send you our weapons, a lot of weapons, our stockpiles of weapons. Well, I did a little research and come to find out that because this country had been at peace for so long, and early in the Cold War, they had bought huge amounts of military weaponry that has an expiration date. Bombs don't last forever. The explosives don't last forever. They become unstable after a certain period of time. That is just the chemistry of powder and explosives. And there was a way that they could get rid of those and order another shipment from the U.S., freshen up their own stuff.
Yeah, you're talking about Ecuador?
I think it might have been Sweden. It may have been Ecuador too, but Sweden or somewhere else. But they were sending all the old munitions from the Cold War and earlier on in time to there so they could get fresh stuff. It wasn't like they were doing it because it was the right thing to do and they cared about the cause, they found a good place to dump the old bread so the new bread could be put on the shelves. So this is an amoral thing, or even immoral. But let us not be fooled. Nobody is rallying behind any of this and taking a part in it. No one. The world is turning against endless wars. They're turning against ethno-religious wars. And it's only through the momentum of habit that we still go along with this.
Yeah, it's interesting, Z, that you mentioned that. I do feel like the tide has turned, especially if you look around at the discourse in this country. You take whether it's Tucker Carlson, Candace Owen. I know these might not be your favorite people, but they're I don't know if anti is the right word. Call it, they're not part of that conventional mindset of let's continue the same foreign policy that's been going on for the past 40 years. So people are starting to ask questions. Do we really need to start these wars? Do we need to spend all this money on the war? Maybe people don't care about whether citizens in other countries live or die, but you do care about where your dollars are going. And if you see a request from Biden for $100 billion to provide weapons to Ukraine and to support Israel and support Taiwan, and then you also scratch your head a little bit and say, okay, if we provide that $100 billion, let me think back. We already provided $40 billion, and that didn't solve the problem. Now we're going to provide $100 billion. What comes next? Is it $200 billion? Where does this actually end? And you look around and you're in a world where you're facing economic hardship, where people are struggling to get by. You have higher prices over the last few years than you've had in a long time. There's a tremendous amount of anxiety. Part of it is the actual economic hardship. Part of it is probably just a feeling that you don't have a safety net, that the system isn't working for you. And that probably creates its own sort of anxiety, just a fear about the future. So you put all these things together and you start to realize, why do we need to be at war thousands of miles away? I'm reading another book about the United States. And if you go back to the early 1900s, late 1800s, even at that time, people recognized that the United States was in a very unique position. You look at Europe, you look at all the shared borders. They're countries that historically have been at war. You look at China, it shares borders with 13 different countries or something like that. So there's always an actual threat or a potential threat, whereas the United States is in a completely different category. So we don't have that same situation. We've got this huge landmass where we've got oceans on both sides. We're not under any threat of attack. There's no imminent danger that we're facing from the rest of the world. So why are we going out and picking fights and trying to kick around other people? And maybe in the past, it wasn't that big of a deal because people didn't feel the same stress and hardship that they feel today. But today, you start scratching your head and you look around and you just do some basic math. And you say, these wars are costing us money. They're also jacking up prices. You look at what happened to oil prices when the Russia-Ukraine war started. You look at what happened to food prices because of all of these sanctions, fertilizer prices. What benefit are we really getting from this? There is no benefit. The only benefit is for politicians who've got some cause that they can rally their base around. It's for executives who are making money selling weapons, or maybe they're selling oil. But for the common person, for all of us, it does nothing. It just puts us in a worse position. And that calculus has become a lot more transparent. So it is interesting to me that we're starting to ask these questions, which I believe is the right thing to do. I mean, we're a country, we're a nation. Why wouldn't we do things that are in our own best interest? Even if we don't care about the rest of humanity, even if we just want to take care of ourselves, we're not doing ourselves any favors. We're creating problems that we're dealing with and that our children are going to deal with. And that's before we even start talking about the threat of this conflict spiraling out of control, the threat of nuclear war, the threat of an end to humanity. So it really makes no sense to be in this position to begin with. But it's taken us a long time to get to this point. And you think about all of the wars that have gone on since Vietnam. You even mentioned the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the endless wars on terror that we fought for the past 20 years, the trillions of dollars that were spent, the lives that were lost, the lost potential of humanity, both within this country, outside of this country. You think about the collective energy, the creativity that has disappeared. It's been replaced by stress and trauma. What could we have done with a different energy, with all that human capital, if we used that and turned it in some productive fashion to advancing our species, to bettering ourselves, to investing in technology, whatever the case may be? We could have made a tremendous advancement, but we haven't done that. And it's taken us a long time to recognize this because we've gotten to a point of sufficient pain. Now, as we often talk about, Z, it's better not to get to that point. We don't want to hit rock bottom to make that turn. And we want to be a little more intelligent. We want to look at what's going on. We want to source those different perspectives and not take things at face value. One question I want to ask you, because I look at all of this, and it's interesting to me how polarized these discussions become and almost how frightening the truth is, or how frightening other points of view are. Why is it so hard for people to listen to other points of view? Why are they so bad? For the reasons we've talked about, if you don't listen to other points of view, you get caught in these echo chambers. It causes stress. It messes up your mind. It leads to mental disease. And you think about the scientific method. That's all about seeking out different types of information. Let me test whether my ideas are correct. And hopefully they are, but if not, I can do something better. Everyone's better off if I've got better information. I can manage myself better. I can get through this life more easily. Why have we become so afraid of looking at different points of view?
It has a lot to do with ego and intellectualism, like anti-intellectualism. And it's really like the bomb. They have these anti-missile missiles, right? They even have an anti-missile missile, right? A missile that stops the anti-missile from knocking out the other missile. So when you look at our intellect, we have different types of intellects. Intellect's the ability to discern and discriminate, but it's not general. It has a lot of specificity to it as it pertains to, let's say, your ego and your identity. So you would ask, like what's going on in the Middle East, how is it that people that were talk a lot about Holocaust and atrocities so readily committing them? You ask yourself, how can a person who was abused in their home become an abuser, right? And there's a direct line to that because of conditioning, because of the way the human ego works. When we push back, we tend to push back the way we identify. Violence begets violence. I think mediation begets mediation. And you'll find that we try to shortcut the intellect. That's intellectualism, where we don't want a lot of details. We want to see a problem and here's the solution. It's really that simple. That's why when you talk to people who hold certain views, within a very short period of time of listening to them, so within a short time of listening to people, you can pretty much figure what they've been listening to, who feeds them information, and then that can easily be compounded. And so we want to really counter that intellectualism with healthy, ego-restrained pursuit of information. And it's a little longer. It's a slightly longer path to get to that information. It's a slightly uncomfortable path. So we have a better understanding of our world, right? And so when you start hearing these themes, these underlying accents, a faint aroma of a certain view, and it goes into that, you want to pull yourself away so that you could maintain some clarity. But in pulling yourself away, again, the warning is you may not be accepted by people that are within your group, right? If there's a person in the Middle East who says, I don't want the genocide, then they're ostracized by the group committing the genocide. And you ask generally, who wants genocide? Nobody raises their hand unless it's our side. You talked about the different rallies to war. And for a long time, because I'm a war fan, I consider myself of a warrior caste. So I tend to understand war. Not that I like war, but I understand how it resolves issue. Armed struggle is the highest form of political struggle. It is final. So for a long time, I had a common theme that I would say that one of the reasons the military is not able to function anymore is because people are too fat, too gay, and too stupid to be in the military. That was something I said. They're too fat, too gay, too stupid to be in the military. And most people, that's an easy answer. You show these pictures of the recruits coming in. They're obese. They have earrings everywhere. They have, rainbow-colored socks, and they're going to the recruit station, and they're not qualified. Well, that's pretty obvious. Well, as it would go, from the mouth of babes comes truth. So I was watching some documentaries on the military, World War II or bomber movies or something, really fascinated with the struggle. And I asked my son, I said, hey, you want to go in the military like I did? He says, nah, I don't want to go in the military. I said, well, I was in. You want to go in the military? He says, nah, that's not worth it. And I thought about it. I said, that's my little guy. And he's saying, it's not worth it. And he totally made sense. None of it is worth it. That's why these young people aren't going. Not because they are too fat, they are too gay, and they are too stupid. But the ones who aren't, they're just not for it because you haven't given them a reason, and they research and they're exposed to information. My 9-year-old Googled up information that told him it's not worth it. There's not a military intervention. It says none of these people are coming to attack the house. The problems that we have are born locally and regionally. They're not born internationally. It is the behavior of people that create these conflicts, and the same people seem to benefit from the conflicts. This is what my 9-year-old figured out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And the other thing that's happening is that a lot of the people who historically have gotten into the military come from military families. And their parents are the ones who were in Iraq and who were part of the war on terror and who came back and said, what the hell did we just go through? What was the point of any of that? We're there for 20 years. We create ISIS. We're in Afghanistan, and then we hand it back after 20 years. It's funny. I saw a cartoon, one of these memes that goes around on Afghanistan that said the next time you feel like a failure, remember that the United States took $2 trillion and 20 years of fighting to hand Afghanistan back to the Taliban. That was the end result of all this. You tried to get them out.
And I think the young people see that, and you can't convince them otherwise. They're made a little different. Even as I said with my son, I was in the military. You want to do it? I was in the military for patriotic reasons. I signed up for the free college. But either way, you still have that fondness or nostalgia. Veterans tend to be a kind of fraternity or sort of people. And they say, hey, what were you in? Did you serve? Blah, blah, blah. What'd you do? Everybody has that kind of thing with the military. But also there's that other part where you realize that you were not some great patriot. You were a mercenary. There were no enemies. You had to fly somewhere to harass people. You had to go somewhere to another person's home or land, impose your will under threat of gun everywhere you went. So if people cooperated with you, it's no different than if you're the boss of a big company and all the girls cooperate with you and date you. Well, you're the boss. It's inappropriate because you're the boss. Well, you came to this country with all sorts of weapons and things like that. And sure, we're going to cooperate with you. That doesn't mean we like you. That doesn't mean we admire you. We just are doing self-preservation. So we want to, the purpose of all this isn't for you to make an opinion about politics or anything. It's just to think for yourself. Just think for yourself. Step back from where it is comfortable and where it is safe is what we always say. How do I opt out of this and find the right path through? I like what the libertarians say when they say none of the above as far as candidates. And then you hear the mainstream kind of Kool-Aid distribution on either side saying you must participate in it. What if we don't want to be a part of anything you guys are doing? What about those of us who want nothing to do with anything that you guys are doing? I don't want to deal with the war. I don't want to deal with pronouns. I don't want to deal with whatever you're arguing over, whether an embryo is alive. I don't want any of this. I don't want to accept that a man is one. I just don't want anything to do with that. I just want to live my life, but I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to bother your life. I don't want to interfere with your right of way. I just don't want to trip over your dog in my restaurant, that restaurant that we have to share together. Where it comes to shared space, I think that's the limit of our freedom. As long as we don't impose upon others whatever our issues are, right? Let that somewhere we can find a level of civility that we can not tread on one another. That's really an idea that would be worth considering. How do we not tread on one another? That's good for your mental health. If you're going to be stressed out about something, be stressed out about ways I don't have to harm others. In yoga, one of the first rules of the yoga is ahimsa, to do no harm, right? To do the most noble principle. You don't have to volunteer for anything. You don't have to run around with a banner or flag. You don't have to virtue signal. Just how about leave other people alone? Find like-minded people and have cooperative, collective individualism, where you find other individuals like you that can agree upon certain ideas, projects, help you build yours, you help them build theirs. And then we sneak around the madness, because right now it is as you say, the dystopian apocalyptic moment, the Kali Yuga, whatever. And you see this. I mean, these people are trying to destroy our world. There are people I hear every day in the political arena who are beating the drums of war, understanding that the war nowadays would unleash so much toxicity into the environment. Even the crashing of drones that leave the waste from the drone would take years and years to clean up. The mining that it requires, the suffering, the generational suffering that is being created will affect us all, even if we're just trying to live our life. So for those of us who are opting out, let's find people within your own reach who share your thinking, who you guys come to some healthy consensus, not forced or imposed, because they have these impositions now. Kind of like when they were saying, do you condemn Hamas, right? They were saying that, do you condemn Hamas? They would just ask people. You couldn't even talk. It's like, do you support transformers, or what's it called? Okay. So do you support transformism? No, I don't support it, but I don't care what you do, but I'm not going to wave a big flag and go to every Tyler Perry movie and support Transformers. I'm not going to do that, right? I'm not going to impose. I'm just not going to do that. And so for those of us who are still trying to keep ourselves grounded, who know the yin, keep to the yin, explore the yang, but know the yin, as the Tao says, the rejection of madness is as important as protection from madness. Not only do we protect ourselves, but we also must reject that imposes upon us so we can be well, so we can focus on our health and well-being, so we can have a strong, not only gross body immune system, but a mental capacity to resist the madness, because there's so much of it that it's normalized. You look at what's going on or what's highlighted, not all what's going on, but what's highlighted is complete madness. And the more you normalize that, the less you have agency over yourself, the easier it is to manipulate you, the easier it is to get you into a model of fear, to listen to these so-called people who are have your best interests at heart. These so-called public authorities, they don't care about you. They're enriching themselves. As every day you hear some political figure busted for corruption, stole this, stole that, been stealing that. Even local officials just milking the coffers of the commons for their own selfish needs to consume more themselves. And you're following these people. People becoming more murderous, more casual about murder. They're becoming younger, crazier. So I'm not saying this to run around in fear. I'm saying this to know that that disease is out there, and how do you protect yourselves from it? Just like when there's a public service announcement of a disease, maybe you should wear a mask. Maybe you should use protection when you are engaging with different partners. I'm telling you now, use protection. When you absorb this information, when you take this information into the most intimate part of you is your mind, and then what it makes you become. You're wondering why younger and younger people are developing old people diseases. Well, our immune systems are breaking down. So if we don't want to be a part of that, you must positively protect your mind. Again, as the Buddha said, positively protect your mind. Do your research, do your study. Don't take the short story, or don't sit around with confirmation bias, looking for stuff that confirms your flawed view, listening for something that has no context to it. The context is all gone. I think about having lived through the human rights and civil rights struggles of Africa and America during the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s into the 70s. And I hear the things now that people are calling civil rights, and it's just insane. But one of the things that I want us to always do when we do Dispassionate Observers, people leave with tools. You leave with tools on how to get through this. I cruise through the different media stations listening, not just to what they're saying, but what they're selling. As I said, always, what are they selling? Even if it's something you like. If you listen to, let's say, conservative radio, what are they selling you and what are they leaving out of the story? If you listen to the so-called liberal or progressive media, what are they selling you or what are they promoting? And when you really listen to these people, nothing that they're selling or promoting is tenable. It's not doable. Their idea of a utopian world is a very bizarre world. Just listen to some of the things they say and imagine if it was able to go the full course of what they say. This would be a horrible world. If you listen to progressive or liberal radio, you would be in a world of no function. The world would cease to function until the last handout was handed out, and then there would be no more. It's just, no, really, I listen to this stuff, and there's nowhere, there's accountability nowhere, there's personal responsibility nowhere, there's effort nowhere. Then you listen to the other side, there are enemies all around. You need to arm yourself and kill everybody that doesn't immediately condemn Hamas or declare Jesus their Lord and Savior. And it just sounds insane. Each side wants to legislate your behavior behind closed doors. They all talk about higher moral values, but they're the most immoral people you'll ever meet. They get busted constantly doing weird shit.
Yeah, it's incredible. You think about the Epstein debacle and the island and the names of the most high-profile business leaders, the most high-profile politicians. These are the people who are running. They're running our country, and they're molesting children. And there's no consequence.
Then beyond that, it's a ritualized molesting and sexualizing of children that these people were engaged in, all of them. And then we get to the point where we're trying to see who was not as bad as the other one. Or do they have my personal interest at bay, even if they have this little personal flaw? Even if they're a little kinky, maybe they can get me what I want. So now we're a part of the problem. As I would say, none of the above. None of the above. And any radio personality or media personality that tries to convince you that you must participate for threat of. I heard one saying, well, if you don't vote for our guy, you're voting for Trump. And I started thinking about it. I really ruminated on this a minute. How are any of these people any better than the other one? You haven't.
No, they're both terrible.
You haven't.
Or they're all terrible.
Enough information to sway me. And I try to, again, go under the paragraph, go deeper into context. How did things came to be? It's kind of like criminals, the criminality in cities. People are saying, oh, these cities are out of control. They're just wild animals that live in the city. Anywhere you go in the world, any zoo in the world, where you have enough people who are marginalized, who are dehumanized, who are abused socially, legally for any period of time, and you don't kill them off, they will act out in a fashion in which you have trained them to act out in. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. What was asked from the police a few years ago was accountability. They didn't ask for no work, for police to just not work. They didn't ask for that. They didn't ask for lawlessness. They said treat police and hold them to the same standards, if not greater, than every citizen. That's all that was asked for. And so in response, they were no longer doing their job. If they couldn't do it their way, if they couldn't crack heads and lynch people at will, then they won't do any work. So that goes all the way up the ladder in terms of our society. And it goes back to us. Be accountable for your own behavior. Ask yourself when you decide you hate somebody or one group or some immigrant or whatever, what did they really do to you? Who's really your greatest nemesis in life? Who made you fat? Who made you miserable? Who made you sad? Who made your days work harder? You did. So that's something we don't really have in our culture, is a deep sense of reverence nor personal responsibility.
Yeah, there's a term that you've used in the past, which I think is interesting, from Chinese medicine, about empty fire, that people are just filled with rage, and maybe it's all the things that they've suppressed. Maybe you're not living in a way that fulfills you. Maybe you're listening to fear and hate and propaganda all day. And so you're just filled with all of this emotion, and you're about to burst, and it's empty because it's not productive. It's not directed anywhere. But you look for something to attach it to. You look for someone to hate, not because they're worthy of hate, but because you got to do something with all these feelings.
And the media will give you ways to direct it because you're blinded by that feeling. And it obscures you from being able to see the world clearly. It creates a great layer, an opaqueness of your senses. So you're like a blind person in a fog. You know, you're just blinded by fog, and then they give you in that fog a description of who you should hate, who you should direct it. Maybe it's the progressive, maybe it's the Republican, definitely it's the migrants of all kinds. And you no longer think, but because now you have the answer. Now you have the answer. And it affects all groups, all demographic groups. And then it's also part of the flavor of America is to be a victim, to not take personal responsibility, and to then feel entitled. So that's the perfect three ingredients for a wonderful poison. Entitlement, right? Non-accountability, and the sense of you're owed something, right? Once you put that together, nothing good can come out of that, on no matter what level of society you're on. So let's think about that and clear ourselves of those maladies, and then move forward. So we strive to opt out. And one thing we have to do as we opt out is to be of sound mind and body. So you can't be crazy and move forward. You can't be. Most of your health problems are because you're crazy. There are solutions for your health problems. If you're fat, lose weight. Do a 16-8 diet and push away. One exercise, push away from the table. Just keep pushing away. Get out and walk and exercise. If you're depressed, lower your expectations of life and be grateful for what you got. Real simple. If you're anxious, be present. Fight to be present. Stop being so damn controlling. If you have trouble in your life with people, you feel exhausted, overwhelmed, nobody's helping, well, stop doing so damn much. Life is pretty short. The hours we have to live are the lowest number of hours we have in our life that are worth of value. We're sleeping 8 hours, you're working 8 hours, you got maybe 8 hours you call your own, but then you have personal responsibilities above and beyond that. You might have 2 hours to yourself. 2 hours times however many thousands of days you got in your life, that's not a lot of time.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point, Z, because we have so little time. It means we have to use that time intelligently, and we need that clear mind. That gets back to the beginning of this conversation, that if you take in information and you're not checking your own biases, or you're just confirming what you already believe, you can go down these rabbit holes and you can lose your mind. And then you get into this mode where you're always reacting, react. You're never stepping back. You're never looking at the bigger picture and asking, what direction do I want to go in? So you don't have any agency. And so that's another reason that we want to keep our mind clear. I think about that shooting that happened, maybe it was 2 years ago now, where there was that kid who became convinced that the white replacement theory was real, and there were all these immigrants and black people coming in to wipe out white people. And there was no feedback. There was no intelligent analysis. There was no, let me take a look at other information. Let me go out and talk to people. Let me try and disprove my views. He spent all of his time on internet chat rooms and got down some labyrinth that he went down that he couldn't pull himself out of. And he got into more and more crazy theories. And I'm not in this kid's head, but I would imagine after a while, your mind is just warped. You can't think clearly. You create your own reality, and there's no check on that because you're not getting any outside feedback or outside information. And so he ends up taking an AR-15 and killing 10 people at a grocery store in New York. And so we don't want to be in that position. We don't want to be so warped and so lost in our own thoughts, our own fears, our own anxieties that we can't think clearly. And that, to me, takes us back to the beginning of this conversation. You talk about individualism. It starts with maintaining control over your own mind. What goes in there? You need presence. You need an ability to discern. You need to fill in the holes and know what your blind spots are. Otherwise, in some ways, we lose the ability to function.
Right, you're so correct with that. And I was thinking when you were talking about that, what people don't know, or for whatever reason we don't want to know, is like the kid that went in the supermarket. There are a million more like him waiting for a moment, a trigger to do that. There are at least a million more like him. That's why I think there's 1.5 or 1.5 mass shootings every day in this country that are reported. And if you listen to the news, if you listen to it on either side, that's what it looks like. And you also look at the things that initiate that. There's no normalcy in our world that when I say normalcy, I don't mean things that are right or things that used to be great. Things didn't used to be great, but they were predictable. That's what was different, I think, in my reflection, looking at my 70 years on this earth, is that there were bad things, but they flowed, and there was a math to it. There was a way you could predict. And now that prediction table doesn't exist. So you have a generally less courteous society. Courtesy used to be a general thing. Excuse me, thank you. Excuse me, thank you. No, you go first. Oh, I'm sorry. People were real quick to speak like that. Even in the rudest of circumstances, people were able to step back and understand the rules of right of way. That doesn't exist anymore. There are whole generations of people that didn't grow up with politeness. Little things, just test it out yourself. Go somewhere and speak kindly to someone, and you will not get the same feedback that you got, I'd say, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. You just don't get it.
Yeah, it's strange now. People almost don't know how to react to kindness. You don't know how to react if some stranger comes and initiates conversation. It freaks people out. You had that example of that girl who stepped in to the studio that you were working with. And I forget exactly what it was. You can fill in the holes, but it was something like, if there's a guy and he starts a conversation with you and he introduces himself, what would you do? And the response was, oh, that's creepy. That's creepy. Right. I don't want any part of it. Well, how are we supposed to function? How are we supposed to communicate?
And I've had on a number of occasions, just as a personal social experiment, in my lifetime, there was a time where basic chivalry, not misogyny, not toxic patriarchy, but you would hold a door for a woman, especially if she had bags or a child. Do that now, and the person feels as if you've set upon them some way, that there is some aggressive act going on. I've done things in traffic where I'll flash my lights and let a person get over, and it started road rage. Why the hell are you flashing your lights at me? Well, that used to be the universal signal of a driver acknowledging another driver. I got you. I see you. That's all it is. So we do have unique challenges that are off the timeline. They're not in the timeline of human development. And so people are dealing with that. And if you're going to stay sane, you want to be able to witness yourself and how you deal with it, not so much others, but how are you doing it? Are you moved into this whole thing, or are you still clear-headed? Because you're going to see medically, younger and younger people are developing cognitive impairment that was with elderly people. I wouldn't doubt, though I haven't seen the research, but I would see that the research would show that long-term releases of cortisol and stress are causing some sort of neuroatrophy. The constantly being under stress, constantly being online, constantly being stimulated is causing a big shift in people. So all this is born with the advancement of technology. And I am pro-tech. I do love technology as it pertains to how it works with us and not against us. So for us opt-outs, we want to always be in a good place where we can clean ourselves, self-edit, self-check, create healthy indexes of our behavior. Can't help other people. You got to help yourself first. You got to take care of you first. You got to make sure you're okay. Know when you're listening and watching all this stuff that it is propaganda and it is untrue. It is, some of it may be true, but because the context is left out, right? Oftentimes people will quote different historians and writers on social issues. Oh, you should read this person. They have the right button. But oftentimes it's out of context, right? It's completely out of context with the whole of a picture, but it confirms an idea that they're comfortable with. So they just say, well, that's a great idea. That's a trusted news source. No news source is trusted. You can enjoy it, trust it, but verify it, right?
Yeah, it's important. And Noam Chomsky made this point. He was talking about a Putin quote, getting back to Putin. How Putin said that the dissolution of the USSR was the biggest mistake that was ever made. And the news media quotes that as evidence that he wants to recreate this empire. And Noam Chomsky said, did you listen to the second half of the quote? Because the second half of the quote was, it was the biggest mistake, and trying to recreate it would be insane. So it was a mistake to let it go, but trying to rebuild it would also be insane. That second part is never reported. It doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is this person is evil and he's looking at taking over the world. So what you're saying, Z, is very important. I mean, to me, it's partially about verifying information. Partially, you're never going to have all the information, but you have to recognize larger patterns. And you have to see how these pieces fit together. If something seems off, then you can go and investigate.
It's something that you bring up Chomsky. For those who don't know, you should know Noam Chomsky. He is a master linguistics, and people don't understand what that means, but the use of words and how they frame our reality. From what I understand, I could be wrong, he's never been beat in a debate. People typically don't like him, not because what he says isn't true. They just don't like the truth of what he's saying. And it would be a good exercise just to listen to Noam Chomsky. He doesn't wave flags. He doesn't promote his religion. He doesn't do that. He simply is a master communicator. And if you don't, you're not supposed to sit there and agree with everything he says, but you should research what he says. If you don't have the time to research it, then you shouldn't get worked up about anything he says. So that's one of those exercises, I think, for opt-outs, is read Noam Chomsky for the sake of understanding the way he frames the world. You don't have to buy into anything. I suggest you think for yourself. So as we kind of bring this to an end, I want us opt-outs, again, to continue our mental health exercises along with your physical fitness regimen. Because if you're not fit physically, you cannot completely enjoy the fitness of your mind. Reverse, if your mind is sick and your body is healthy, you're a useless dummy or a useful idiot, one or the other. Okay? That's my take on it, Radheya. How about you?
Yeah, I'll just add one final thought. We've talked about how a lot of people have lost themselves, or you've got so much bias in a certain area that you can't get through to a person. One thing I've learned from you is respecting the limits of relationships. We don't always have to get our point of view across. We can be cool with people at one level, and maybe there's certain areas that we just don't want to go. We don't want to get into discussions. If we think about how to navigate this crazy world that we're in, one of the most intelligent things we can do is keep our mouths shut. just shut up. Don't get yourself into trouble. And if you're informed, or if you find like-minded people, as we've been talking about, you can have a different sort of relationship.
So I always refer to that as the cross-section of virtue versus righteousness, or harmony. Virtue, righteousness, and harmony. So when you find that intersection of virtue, harmony, and so forth, sometimes you have to give up a little bit of righteousness, a little bit of virtue to be harmonious. That's another way to say limits. Not everybody can you go. If you have a relative or friend that's a religious fanatic, you know not to talk too much about religion with them. You're not going to change their mind. You want to maintain the harmony. That doesn't take much from you, maybe your virtues or your righteousness. You want to correct them. You want to do all that. But at the end of the day, they're going to stick to their views, and you're not going to change their mind. You're not going to change people's mind by presenting them with facts.
Yeah, well said.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on Podbean, iTunes, or your favorite podcasting app. Each 5-star review helps us bring you more unique and insightful content. Learn more at dharmamedia.com. Peace.